So this is the long-awaited third and final video in our series on our ownership experience of the MGZSEV here in Australia. So we're coming up on nearly 4 years of ownership, and today I'm going to answer 4 questions which might help you out if you're thinking of buying one of these vehicles down under. So my first question is, if I had my time over, knowing what I know now, would I buy the MGZSEV 2020 model again? The second question is, would I buy the new MGZSEV? So that's the 2024 model, and what other EVs would I compare it against? The third question we'll look at is, would I buy the 2020 model now as a second-hand EV? And that question is probably going to interest a lot of people. And if I was going to buy it second-hand, what are the things that I'd be looking out for? So stay with us. This video is brought to you by Regen EV Charging Install, Australia's residential and commercial EVSE installation specialists. Links to these sponsors are in the show notes. Hi, my name's Greg and this is Marley. Welcome to Electric Car Australia, the Aussie EV channel for the real world. Well, as we mentioned, we've got the MGZSEV, the Mark 1 model, which first launched in Australia in 2020. And we're going to go through those 4 questions and help you out if you're thinking of buying one of these cars, and also get our thoughts on what we think of it after nearly 4 years of ownership. So the first question was, would I buy this car again, knowing what I know now, if I had my time over? And look, the answer to that is yes. At the time, it was the cheapest EV model available in Australia, and there was no others in my budget. So that was the first thing that ticked the box. Keep in mind there was no BYDs in Australia, so we see BYDs on the road everywhere now, but back in 2020 there was none of those around. The Model 3 from Tesla was about 1.5 times the price of this car. Now, of course, it was a lot more technologically advanced car, but at 1.5 times the price, it was just out of my budget. The Hyundai Kona is a good car, very reliable, great tech in those cars, very efficient. But it was too small. The boot space in the Kona is a fraction of what this ZSEV is, so that was out. The Ioniq. Now, the Ioniq is another model from Hyundai. I think the Ioniq is a very underrated car, also very efficient, very reliable, but the boot on those were too small. The hatch sloped down a lot and we couldn't get our dog in, so the early model Ioniqs were also out. And of course we've got the Nissan Leaf, one of the groundbreaking EVs, been around for over 15 years, but no thermal cooling on the batteries of those, and they had the CHAdeMO charging, so yeah, wasn't interested in a Nissan Leaf. So some other things that we've since found out, which we actually quite like, they're cheap for insurance. So compared to a lot of other EVs, the MGZSEV is very cheap to insure. There's a large dealer network. Now, obviously I knew that when we bought it. There's MG dealers around Australia, so that I think is a good thing. And the car had also been released in the UK for over 12 months in the right-hand drive market, so there was lots of reviews and information online, so that gave me some comfort as well. And look, there's a good warranty on these cars, so 7 years on the frame and the chassis, etc., and 8 years on the battery, so the warranty was good. And the depreciation since then hasn't been too bad. Obviously, when you buy a new car, you cop depreciation, especially in the first couple of years. As my regular listeners will know, this is the first new car I've ever bought in my life. I always buy second-hand cars, about 2 years old, with low kilometres, for that very reason. So we have copped some depreciation with this, which is expected. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but it's probably a little higher than you would normally have, given that there has been a lot of new, higher tech, higher spec models coming out. So a quick summary of some of the best and worst things about this car. So if you haven't already, please have a look at the other two videos I've done prior to this one. They go into a lot more detail on these. But in summary, some of the worst things in this car is the glass. It's got very poor glass, lets in all the UV, so you do need to get window tinting. The interior lights as well, or lack of interior lights, is a big issue for me. We done some work and fixed that, but that was annoying. And the software, look, the software works, but it is a bit buggy and glitchy. One of the most annoying things for me with the software is there's no capability to set charging limits. So unfortunately you can't stop a charge at 80%. And the car has a bit of a light duty feel to it. I am being a little bit critical here because it is only a lower price budget type car, but sometimes it does have that little bit of a light feel. So you can judge that yourself if you're comparing it against other cheaper cars. So they're the sort of handful of worst things I think about the car. The best things obviously were the value for money, the upfront cost. The inclusions in this car for the price were fantastic. We cover all those in the other videos, but things like full length sunroofs, heated front seats, all that sort of stuff. So it was great value. And it also is second hand, or will be second hand, and we'll talk about that later. The ongoing running costs of the car, they've been fantastic. Obviously electricity costs are a lot less than petrol, and we charge from solar most of the time. Parts, MG parts are cheap, which is good. Insurance, we've mentioned that, low price for insurance. It's a standard tyre size, so again, if you're looking to keep your costs down, you're not paying astronomical prices for sort of fancy tyres. And the tyres on this car were a good brand. They're a Michelin tyre. Primacy 2s in comparison to the BYDs, which had a cheap brand of tyre, so really like that. And look, for me, it's the perfect size, perfect commuter car for around the city. We'll go into some more details shortly, but the battery is a 44 kilowatt hour battery, so it's not the biggest, but again, for around town, it's the perfect size. You're not paying for a great big heavy battery that you're not using. It's got 5-star safety rating. It's got multiple ISO fixed points in the back, so we've had 2 child seats in here, so it's great for a family. Also, it's got some hard plastic, and they call it leatherette, but it's, let's face it, it's vinyl type seats. So all that's pretty good, low maintenance if you've got a family with kids or animals. So now let's hit up question number 2. So if I was in the market and my circumstances were exactly the same, would I buy the new model MGZSEV today? Now that's a lot harder question because obviously there's more models around, more to compare it with. So the most direct competitor, as most of you will know, is the BYD Atto 3. It's pretty much the same sized vehicle, has a lot of the same specifications, etc. But there's a couple of key differences. It is similar in a lot of ways though. So the considerations I would be thinking about, and I guess I'd encourage you to think about as well, is there's a different interior look and feel for the Atto 3. The exterior is fairly similar, but the interior really, it's one of those like it or hate it type things. And I've done interviews with owners. The videos are on the channel if you want to have a look at those. And some people have said the interior grew on them the longer they had the car. Other people, it was love at first sight when they first seen it. For me, not so much. It is a little bit of a step too far. So I'm not saying it would be a showstopper alone, the interior of the car, but I do prefer, I guess, a bit of an old school standard sort of look. So keep that in mind. Another consideration with the Atto 3 is the dealership buying and service experience. So as most of you will know, MG have dealerships all over Australia. We've covered that and the number of dealers in one of the previous videos. Whereas BYD, they are definitely building out that dealership capability. They've done some joint ventures with a couple of companies to assist with that, but that would be a consideration that I'd be taking into account as well. The warranty, so the warranties with BYD and MG are slightly different. So I'd be looking at the warranty on the big main traction battery, which is obviously the expensive heart of the car, and also the body chassis warranties. Now when we're talking about warranties on batteries, keep in mind most companies will warrant to 70% of the original battery's state of health, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The other things I would be considering are parts availability. So we mentioned parts before. New parts are cheap, but the availability of second-hand parts for these cars is fantastic because the petrol model of these cars has been out for quite a while in Australia as well. They were very popular, so there's lots of second-hand wreckers, taillights, wipers, all that sort of stuff. So availability of second-hand parts, fantastic for these cars, not so much for the Atto 3. The insurances we mentioned, probably much of a muchness with BYD and the MG, but I would consider that, and I'd be checking that with the current models, whether there's much of a difference there. One of the things that the BYD is out in front on is it's a dedicated EV platform. So what that means is it's built from the ground up as an EV. So there's a little bit better space maximisation in the car than this car, because this car is based on a petrol model. I don't think it's a big thing, but it is a consideration that the Atto is an EV up platform. And the buying price of these vehicles is very similar. You might be able to haggle a little bit better on an MG, given they don't have the online buying experience that BYD do. So you can go into the dealership, you might be able to haggle over the new price. But look, at the moment, the prices of the new MGZSEV compared to the Atto 3 are pretty similar. So to wrap up, personally for me, I'd probably go with the MG. It's just ahead on that interior look and feel that, like I said, I do prefer. The dealerships, it has got a more established dealership model. Like I said, BYD's building it out, but they're not quite there yet. The warranty and parts availability as well. And the customization. So again, because there was a petrol model of this one around, there's a lot more aftermarket parts available. And you'll notice on this car we've got, and we've done a separate video on this too, there's a few accessories on this that we've, I wouldn't say tricked the car up, but if you want to customise your car a little bit, probably more options on the MG. Having said that though, I do think the BYD has a better interior feel to it. So the quality of the interior definitely seems to be a little bit better than the MG. They've also got better interior lighting out of the factory, which is fantastic. That's something I think MG's really let themselves down on. And arguably some people really like the Blade battery technology. That's an individual thing. I don't put too much weight on it, but it is a consideration. So those things are in the favour of the BYD. And the other thing I'd mention is if you're looking or considering the BYD or the MG, I would always go with the longer range battery model. It does cost a little bit more, but keep in mind it gives you some flexibility. So as the car ages and your battery degrades and you get less range, if you start out with a bigger battery and on some longer range, that definitely helps you out down the track. And I'd argue it's probably going to help for resale value as well. And at the moment, the car prices, for the long ranges are about $4,000 to $5,000 more. So it's not that much more to pay for that bigger battery. But again, that'll come down to how you use the car. If you are only going to use it for around town, probably not any point in paying for that bigger battery. And look, I look forward to reading your comments on my thoughts. So if you're in the market for a compact SUV like this and you're thinking about the MG or the Atto 3, pop your comments in the show notes and let me know what you think, and also the rest of the community. So what if my needs had changed and I was looking for a bit smaller car, budget had been slashed, so we were looking for something a bit cheaper? Well, obviously at the moment the BYD Dolphin would be in the mix. The MG4, which has gotten really great reviews. I haven't had a chance to drive that car yet, but lots and lots of new owners here in Australia are loving that car. The Aura, so we've done an interview with an Aura owner on the channel, so you can check that video out. And of course the Aura at the moment here in Queensland in April 2024, you can drive that away for $36,000. So that's not bad for a pretty high spec little car. And there's another vehicle that people mightn't have thought of. It's the Peugeot E2008. Now this is based on a petrol model vehicle, so it's a little bit compromised like this one is, but the price of those has been reduced to $40,000 drive away here in Australia because there's a lot of new Peugeot electric models coming, so they're clearing those out. It does have a bit of a smaller battery. You're looking at only about 280 kilometres real world range, so just keep that in mind. But there's some models you might consider if you were looking for a smaller vehicle and you had a lower priced budget. Now if you want a larger vehicle or your budget has got a few more dollars in it, have a look at the Model 3 obviously from Tesla. It's a bit long in the tooth now, but they've refreshed that shortly and that's a very good car. Even the Model Y, a few more dollars, but that's definitely a bigger car. We've got the BYD Seal now, which I think for what it is very good value, and the quality of those vehicles, the interior of that vehicle is much better than the Atto 3, so very good option, the BYD Seal. The Renault Megane E-Tech, probably only slightly bigger than this car, but definitely a few more dollars. You're probably looking at about $20,000 more, but if you like your European cars, definitely check out the Megane E-Tech. The Kona Electric, of course, the new model electric Kona would be an option. Again, more highly priced than this car, definitely. The Cupra Born, which is a nice looking little hatch. The Volvo EX30 has just been launched in Australia this week, so go and check that out. And if you've got an even bigger wallet, you could check out the Ford Mach-E electric. A very nice car, but I think overpriced in Australia. But if you're a Ford fan and you want electric, might be worth having a look at. The Volvo EX40, again, a bit compromised based on a petrol model vehicle, but it is a very nice vehicle with a bigger price tag. The Hyundai Ioniq 5, you can check that vehicle out. The Kia EV6, and of course coming soon to Australia. We're a few years behind the 8-ball from Volkswagen, but we are getting the ID4 and the ID5 very shortly. But if you don't have the budget for one of those new EVs, let's have a look at second-hand ones. Okay, well I'm back in the car. I love doing outside shots, but it's really difficult to get a quiet spot, as you would have heard all the other vehicles coming, and we had some ants and mozzies attacking me. So we're back in the car. So to question number 3, would I buy the 2020 model MGZSEV as a second-hand EV in Australia? And what other models would I be comparing it against? Well, the short answer is definitely. At $25,000 to $30,000 after that depreciation we talked about, I think these are a really good value EV. They've got a thermally managed battery. They're not a connected car, and what I mean by that is you don't need to have a SIM card in them, so you're not paying to have access to the cloud or internet, so they're totally standalone. The availability of these cars and cheap parts, so as I said, they launched in 2020, so there's a few of them now starting to come onto the market, whereas the Atto 3s, there's not as many around. And we've talked about it before, the availability of parts, there's heaps of parts, so if you do have any little nicks, scratches, bumps, things that you need to pick up or fix, lots of parts around to do that. The reliability's good. There's been a few little niggles, and if you're seriously thinking about this car, I'm sure you're reading other forums, etc. But overall, they've been a pretty reliable little vehicle. Australia-wide dealerships and service, as we mentioned, so if you do need to take it in to get some work done on it, lots of dealers spread around the country. battery degradation has been reasonable. It's sort of mid-range, so it's not the best. Hyundai and Tesla are probably right up there with battery degradation. There's some brands that have more degradation, so MG's sort of sitting in the middle, so I wouldn't be too worried about your battery. And maintenance costs over the years as the car gets older will definitely be a lot lower than the petrol models. So all in all, yeah, I think they're a pretty good buy around that price. So to quickly go through some other options. So if we're looking for a second-hand EV at the moment in this sort of price range or size, what would be looking at? Well, you could look at the older model Hyundai Konas. So as we said, they're a smaller vehicle, less luggage space, but they do hold their value quite well. So you will pay a bit more for those. The Hyundai Ioniq, as I mentioned, underrated car, lower range, because some of the early models of those only had a 28 kilowatt hour battery, so you do need to be aware that you'll have less range. The BMW i3, now that was a fantastic, groundbreaking little car, but there's not as many around and you will pay more for those. They're not cheap. The Nissan Leaf, as we mentioned before, it's got old tech, so it doesn't have a thermally managed battery. It's pretty much just an air-cooled battery, so you're buying really old tech there, and the batteries generally aren't in as good a health. Also, they've got a discontinued charge protocol or charge type. So for the rapid charging, they use CHAdeMO, which are getting harder and harder to find in comparison to CCS2. And some of the really early cars had type 1 level 2 AC charging, so those plugs are hard to find as well. You need adapters. But still possible, you can still do it. The newer Nissan Leafs had the type 2 AC charging, but just be aware that if you are looking at Leaf, I would suggest that you want to pay a fair bit lower price for not having thermally managed battery and for having the now redundant sort of charging plugs. You could go to a Model 3 from Tesla. Lots of those around secondhand now, but as we mentioned before, it's a different driving experience and interior feel. You've got one center screen, that's pretty much it. But they are providing good value, top software, they're a good driver's car, top battery reliability. They've got a longer range and the charging network. So let's forget the Tesla supercharger network. It's plug and play. So even though other cars can now start using that charge network, you do need to have an app, an account and all that sort of stuff. If you own a Tesla vehicle, you literally pull up, plug in and away you go. It's all linked in the background. So definitely worth considering a Tesla. So we're getting towards the end. We'll talk a bit more about what to look out for if you're seriously thinking about buying one of these cars in the future. But just be aware, if you're comparing it against an ICE or an internal combustion engine petrol ZS, you're probably still going to pay 20 to 30% higher price. So if you're really on a budget, you're still going to be paying more upfront for this car than the petrol model. But I'd suggest over time your fuel savings and your servicing costs will compensate you for that. It is going to take a few years, so it depends on how many kilometres you drive and how long you keep the car, whether you'll get that return on investment. But keep in mind, one of the main reasons I bought an EV was definitely for environmental reasons. Now, I know people will argue the point and all this sort of stuff, but I've been into solar for 30 plus years, and to be able to generate my own energy on my roof and put it into my car to drive it was the main reason I bought it. It wasn't financial, but if you are on a lower budget, be aware you will still pay 20 to 30% more for the second-hand EV ZS than you will the petrol model. And the final thing I'll mention on that, as the EV ages, you won't lose efficiency. So obviously you'll need to watch your state of health of your battery, but petrol and diesel engines and gearboxes, etc., as they age and wear, they lose efficiency. So they start to use more fuel, they might start to burn oil, etc. You won't have those problems with an EV, so that's definitely an advantage. Okay, so here's our last question. Question number 4, the key things to look out for if you are considering the 2020 model ZSEV as a second-hand vehicle. Now, of course, it is a vehicle, so it's the same as any other car. So all that mechanical stuff, I'd be checking all that as normal. So you want to look at the history of the car, the quality of the look and feel of the car, how it's been looked after, and also obviously consider the price. But for an EV, I think the number one thing is the state of health of the battery. So you're going to need to get a state of health check. Now, interestingly, I've talked to multiple MG dealers here in Queensland, and I've even talked to MG Australia. And believe it or not, MG tell me that they cannot give you a state of health battery report. Now, I find that really hard to believe. So if you are buying a second-hand one, you'll need to dig around and find out how you can get a state of health check that you can trust. So obviously you can buy an OBD dongle and you can plug that in, and there's apps. And again, search the channel. I've done multiple other videos on that subject. So you could actually plug a dongle in if the seller didn't mind you doing that, and you could check the state of health yourself. The other alternative is to take it to an independent EV mechanic. So if you can find one of those around your area, take the car to them and get them to do a report. Failing that, you could try MG, but as I've said, they have been reluctant to just give a clear state of health. So that's the number one thing for any EV. If you're buying secondhand, you will need to get that state of health check done. So some other things to ask the owner is ask about the charging history of the car. So as most of you will know, DC rapid charging stresses the battery a lot more than home charging or level 2 AC charging. So ask them how much DC versus AC charging has been done. So while we're talking about state of health of the battery and charging, keep in mind most degradation happens in the first 1 to 2 years. So when you get a new EV, you'll see a step change down in the state of health of the battery in the first year or two, and then it really slows down and levels off. So if you see a bit of a decent drop, don't be too alarmed in that first year or two, as long as it levels off. The other thing, if you're considering one of these cars, I've done a full-length video on this one. There was a few models or few versions that had a steering issue, so make sure you have a chat to the owner about that. Ask them if they've ever had any steering issues with the car, any replacement. To get all the details on that, check out the video that I've done on that one. Ask if it's had all the software updates. So MG, again, they're not very transparent on updates, software versions, etc. So it doesn't hurt to ask the owner at the last service or if they've had any software updates done. The really early models, there was a problem, and the first few into Australia had to have a software upgrade, and that got rid of some beeping. There was lots of safety beeping and stuff, which was annoying, and there was also a battery management system or BMS update that was done. So the most or the oldest software version you want to ensure that the range is in the center bottom of the dash screen. So when you start the car up, the range needs to be shown in the center bottom, and you'll know at least you've got the minimum software version that you would want, but just check if there's any updates that have been done to the car post that initial one. I'm sorry, another thing I forgot to mention, if you've got that sort of second update that was done in the Australian cars, it will also show the outside temperature. So if you've got the outside temperature shown on the infotainment system, you know that you've at least got that sort of basic update from the Australian vehicles. Okay, so of course, back to some more basic stuff. Check the kilometres that have been driven. Generally, the lower kilometre cars, the better. Check your logbook services, the condition of the tyres. Make sure the tyres aren't scrubbing on one side, which might allude to a steering problem like we mentioned before, or a wheel alignment out of whack. Check for any collision damage, so look around sort of the doors when you've got the doors open under the bonnet to see whether there's been any spanners on things or any mismatched paint colours. Have a look for some signs of rust. There's been a few people talking about rust on these cars. Look, I haven't had any problems, but do your general sort of checks in that area. And look at any general weathering. So are the headlights starting to go a little bit milky, or the rubbers on the vehicle, are they still in pretty good condition? Obviously, depending on when you buy the car, have a think about the remaining warranty. So you've got the car warranty, but also you've got the battery warranty, and we talked about the 70% state of health. So providing your battery is still well above 70% state of health, you will still have some warranty in that space. And keep in mind, the batteries are made up of a cell, so an individual cell. They put that into a module, and then the module goes into a pack, which is your large battery pack. So read the fine print on warranties, because some warranties will replace the entire battery pack in the car, some will replace only a module, and some will actually take it down and replace a cell. So just be aware of it, read the fine print if you can find it. Get some independent EV specialist advice. So I mentioned that before. If you do have an EV specialist around, good idea to actually take the car to them and get them to give it a good once over. And keep in mind, if you're buying it second hand, you might get some, let's call them freebies thrown in. So this car has got a lot of extra accessories, the interior light upgrade I've done, etc. So you might get a couple of level 1 granny chargers. You might get a 15 amp granny charger, 10 amp one. You might get a type 2 cable that the owner's going to throw into the car, floor mats, tinting, which these cars, every ZSEV needs tinting. As I mentioned before, the glass is pretty poor. Weather shields like this car's got. You might have ceramic paint protection. You might have a physical spare tyre, because these cars only come with a foam cartridge, so you might get a tyre. And I mentioned you might even get some interior lighting upgrades. So yeah, one of the benefits of buying a second-hand car, you might get some of those thrown in, and it doesn't hurt to be cheeky and ask the owner if there's a level 2 cable in the boot. Just check with them, is that included in the sale? Okay, well, this video is starting to get a bit long, so we're going to wrap it up. So in summary, it was the lowest priced EV I could buy brand new at the time. Look, it doesn't have the greatest software, but it does do the job. Be aware it is a bit of a smaller battery compared to the vehicles on the market. So if you've got a little bit of battery degradation, your range will be a little bit lower. But as I mentioned before, it's the perfect commuter car for around town, dropping the kids off. Very economical for doing that sort of stuff. It's got good thermal management of the battery, so the battery should last a decent amount of time in these cars. Just keep in mind how you're charging it. So if you primarily do level 2 home charging or AC charging, the battery is going to last a lot longer than if you're doing road trips and DC rapid charging it all the time. But you can do that on the odd time. So we've had this car from Brisbane to Sydney and back. We've done a lot of regional road trips camping. So I'm not saying it can't do that. It's just you wouldn't want it. You wouldn't buy it for the primary reason for doing that. It's primarily a city sort of round town commuter car. At the moment, we're down to about 220, 240 kilometres of real world range. Now that's with the AC on, with a bit of a load in it, etc. So, and driving at highway speeds. Around town, you're going to get up close to that 300 between charges. But of course, around town, it doesn't matter, because you can charge every day at home. So your range around town's not as important as your road tripping highway speed range. So at the moment, we're about 220 sort of to 240 under normal driving conditions. So a hot tip on range, particularly when you're going on a road trip, I've found is headwinds. Out of everything that can affect your range, I've found headwind has been the biggest thing with the ZSEV. Now maybe that's because it's not that aerodynamic, it's a bit like a brick, but if you're going into a decent headwind, it will significantly reduce your range. So yeah, just be aware of that. If you live in a windy coastal sort of area and you do a few road trips, that wind will affect your range. So you can chop off another probably 20 or 30% off that figure I just gave you for strong headwinds. Well, I'm going to throw over to my wingman for some closing remarks. So we've had the ZS for 3.5, nearly 4 years now. So what do you like about it?
Well, the sunroof and like how the back windows can go fully down, then like the old Passat, like they can't go fully down, and Like,
So the window goes right
Yeah.
down in the door. Yeah.
And like, yeah.
It's a good size.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's got heated seats. A few games like that you can play.
Yeah.
Heated front seats. Yep. So look, that's it for another video. A big thank you to my truly awesome supporters who pay a small monthly donation to assist me in making these videos, and you can join them with a one-off donation or a small monthly subscription using the donation links below, and of course the links to those platforms are in the show notes. Also, a big shout out to my channel sponsor, Regen EV. So if you're looking for any home or commercial charging, check those guys out. And finally, if you're thinking of going EV and you want to save heaps of time and money doing your research, instead of searching on all those forums and Facebook, etc., why not book a session with myself? You can visit the website below for more information and also book an appointment. So look, that's it for another video. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate your support. Look after your friends and family. And until next time, take care, stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.